city of Houston.
Yes!
Yeah.
That was exactly my impression. Although what was really neat was that, unlike DC, parking in the city wasn't as difficult.
No.
Navigating was.
Yeah. Going through downtown DC. I mean, not DC, downtown Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not much going on down there, which is funny because like you would think like all those energy companies, they would be pretty much set in downtown, but that's not really the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird to like drive past the Halliburton headquarters, you know, like on the way from the airport.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of.
Yeah, that's right by
Okay.
George Bush
Yeah.
Airport.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah. One thing I actually miss Texas more than I miss New York, honestly.
Really?
It's just weird. That's what I love about Texas.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm actually gonna move this over. Just hoping this isn't too high. Oh, this is definitely too high. What the fuck am I doing? In a few minutes, I'm just gonna like throw up my hands and say, "Fuck it, that's good enough."
Okay. Actually, I'm taking classes right now on media, so I'm
Oh,
trying
good.
to figure out how to do field production, studio production, learn about different microphones to use and all that stuff, video editing. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what comes out of these classes I'm taking.
Oh. Where are you taking these classes?
Here at Arlington Independent Media.
Arlington Independent Media. Okay, if you'll excuse me real quick, I got
Sure.
all three lines. Balls! Alright, we're good. That's just because I'm gonna be probably switching between using audio from all three.
Okay.
I just say something loudly in order to sync up the audio when I put them all together. Which, I mean, that's probably a very kind of simple thing that they would that they would tell you. I guess I don't know what am I talking about. This is not not about me at all.
So do we start now, or how do where do I face, or?
I am gonna say go ahead and face me, because what I'm getting from over here is kind of like a nice sort of 3/4.
Okay.
Here, actually, pretend that I'm sitting in
One of these chairs over here?
Yeah, the chair closest to you. Pretend that I'm sitting there. All right, that looks good. Both of those look good. Okay. I'm just gonna get a little closer to you. Just finicky, don't mind me. That's good. That's good. Actually, I should just leave these turned around. Fuck it. That's probably a better idea. Okay. Better idea, actually. This one I just want to have like right here. Having an opposite angle is going to be better. good.
All right.
And then the last thing that I think I'm gonna do is I think I'm gonna move that eyeball. It's tape. It's tape.
Yeah, it's tape. It should be tape.
Cool. Good, and I'm not destroying anything. I love not destroying things. Okay. All right. We're good. And punch me if I'm not done.
Okay.
All right. The only thing, I don't want you to have to think too much about your responses, just let them come naturally.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that I want to caution you against is if I ask you a question that could be answered as simply as yes or no, don't answer it as simply as yes or no. Like if I say like, if I ask you something like,
Do you think Freddie's funny? Yes. No, it's like, I guess.
yeah, exactly. Like instead I want you to say
Expand on
like,
that.
I think Freddie Ramirez is very funny instead of yes, I think he's funny. Or like, I think he sucks and here's why. Like,
Yeah, I get you.
okay,
Okay.
cool. Okay, well, in that case, I want to know how you, tell me about when you first met Freddie Ramirez.
See, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, when was the first time I actually met him? I know I met him at RFD, this one place where a lot of comics got their first start in DC, in Chinatown. And I remember, well, he's pretty easy to spot because he needs help to get up on stage. So that was one thing. And then, of course, he's a Hispanic comic, and that's actually not very common in the DC comedy scene. So any of the Latin comics that I come across, you know, it's kind of like, oh, okay, cool. You know, there's very few of us in the DC comedy scene. So that was another thing that stuck out. So I remember him being carried onto the stage, and then when he had his jokes, and I just remember just being like, oh, this kid's funny. Like, you know, not to mention he seems very particular about how he gets carried up on stage too, which is another thing is like, only Freddie, you know, he's just kind of like, would sort of, he just pizzazzes his way up on stage like no other person really. So when I've done my shows, it's kind of good to know that I don't have a stage. So he just pretty much wheels himself up to the front. So no assistance there needed. Yeah. But yeah, I don't remember. I can't recall how long ago, but I would say probably about 4 years ago. I would say, yeah, about that time. Yeah.
Okay. The place that you mentioned, you said RFD?
Yes, RFD. They recently closed down. It's Regional Food and Drink. Not a very good. I mean, I think the acronym for that place definitely sticks out more than the actual name of the place. They were just known for their beers, a huge beer selection. They were there for like over 25 years, I think. And they were situated right by the Verizon Center, which was awesome location for comedy, really. Easy access to get to, and they had a show every Thursday night there, and it was hosted by Ralph Cooper and a couple of other comics that would come in, and a lot of first-timer comics would start in that room. And it was just a very friendly, motivated crowd there, so it was always a good time at that particular venue.
Okay. I've heard him mention it. I've heard Freddie mention that place a few times, sort of like very fondly, and he always gets kind of sad.
Yeah, it's a little sad. I mean, I think a lot of comics were very, very, very fond of it. I started off there. I started doing comedy about 7 years ago, and that was the first room I had gone to, and that was just only because I had wanted to start doing comedy, and a friend of mine had told me, he's like, oh, if you wanted to see like some really shitty comics doing open mic stand-up, he was like, you gotta go to this place. He's like, don't get me wrong, he's like, you're gonna see like some really good comics, but you're gonna see some really horrible comics, and it's gonna make you want to go up on stage. So I took him up on the offer, and of course, they had just started the room at that time, so this was like 2010, sometime in the fall. And I went to check it out. I went on a date with this girl. And I remember at first, you know, there was some really good comics, and of course it was like, I was like, oh man, like I was kind of blown away, and it was my first live comedy show that I've ever been to. So then when the show started shifting to like the amateur comics, that's when I was like, oh, I kind of want to sign up for this. So I signed up, and I remember Ralph was like, "You sure? You're ready to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to do it." And then he was like, "All right." He's like, "I'll put you on the list." And so I got really nervous at that point. I started drinking and started pounding down the drinks, and then I ended up getting bumped from the show that night. So I never even got to perform that night. But then he was like, "Come back next week." He was like, "I'll put you on the show." And I bombed, and I thought that was going to be it for me as far as comedy, but then a couple of weeks later went by, and I was just like, I got to do this again. And that's how I got started in comedy.
How often would you say that you play shows?
Do I what?
How often would you say that you do shows? How often would you say that?
Did I produce shows? Probably 3 or 4 times out of the year, mostly because of since I work for Arlington Public Library, so I have a class that I teach, and I try to introduce people to comedy and try to give them pretty much hold their hand to do stand-up, their first 5 minutes of comedy. And I always I have a venue after the 4 weeks of class, then I'll set up the venue, I'll get the venue, and then I'll invite the comics, set the date, and then pretty much have the students perform in the middle of both comics who've been doing it for some time, and then having the first timers in the middle, and then end it with somebody who's going to close out the show. So yeah, about 3 or 4 times a year I do one.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thanks.
When it comes to Freddie is definitely he's continually trying to hone his craft, and I've noticed that he tends to measure himself by looking at where other people are.
Right.
How would you say sorry, I'm probably asking this the wrong way. Having seen his act, having seen him perform, what advice do you have for him?
For him? I mean, I should have mentioned I've had him on a few of my shows. Once I saw him at RFD, I was like, oh, I'm going to have him on one of my shows. So, I mean, when I first met him, I knew he had been doing it for a short period of time. And I think the most memorable thing that he's ever done at one of my shows was that I had, we used to do a show, when I first started my class, the venue was here at Bayou Bakery, which is a block away from here. Only problem was it was on a Monday night, so getting people to show up that was the only time we could actually get the comedy show there. And it was, I wouldn't say it was a disaster, but it was just it wasn't comedy friendly. So my second year, I was like, I'm gonna go find a venue that I'm like, this will be the venue that comics are gonna wanna come, and it's gonna be a pretty good show. So I found this place on Columbia Pike here in Arlington called P. Brennan's. It's an Irish bar. The place was huge, right? So it's a big, big venue. So immediately when I saw the stage and I saw, the amount of people that we can get in there for a comedy show, I was like, yes, this is going to be a great comedy show. So it actually was not a good venue for comedy. You would think that a big venue is actually good for comedy, but it wasn't. The acoustics were pretty bad there. It's more catered to a music venue than it would be for a comedy venue. Not to mention the owners weren't really, they were supportive of the idea, but they didn't really promote it either. So they triple booked us. So 2 times we had to deal with these rowdy poker players who you would think, normally they play quietly. For some reason they just decided to heckle us throughout the show. And then the first time we did it, we were dealing with a Caps playoff game at the same time. So trying to compete with all these 2 things going on, the first show was a total disaster. So the second time I had Freddie come out for the show, and of course we had the poker players off to the side, and they weren't as bad, as boisterous as they were the first time around. Caps fans were actually pretty good the first one. They were pretty forgiving, even though we had to mute the third period of that particular show. So, so I knew, I was like, well, I need comics that are definitely going to project, comics who are definitely going to come out and just bring the A game. So when Freddie came out, at first, you know, I kind of was like, I don't know what to expect, but I had him early on the list. And I knew, I was like, he could have a really good set or he could just have an okay set. And there was this one couple in the front, and the guy was, I guess they were out on a date, and the guy was clearly not happy that there was a comedy show going on. Like, he could have just left, you know, but instead he just decided to heckle the comics and the first group of comics. And then, not to mention, there was a family in there that came in to have dinner right at the time that we started. So like, the owner came by and was like, look, you guys can't really curse or like talk about certain things. And Freddie was very pissed. And he knew, he was like, this fucking sucks, man. He's like, this is an Irish bar. He's like, you know, a pub. He's like, why would you bring your family here for a family dinner? So I remember the host had a bad, you know, tough time with the couple in the front. And Freddie was like, I'm gonna go after this guy. I'm gonna totally go after him. And you know, if he tries to heckle me, I'm definitely just bring it to him. And I gotta say, I was like, out of all the comics that night, he definitely got that guy to kind of pretty much like, he pretty much gave him props for his set. It was a really good set. And I remember Freddie just basically like came in there, was just like not intimidated, because some comics do get intimidated by the fact that somebody in the front is not really like, or is interfering with their set. He didn't care. He was like, I'm gonna talk shit right back to him. And that's exactly what he did. And at the end, I remember the guy kind of like gave him a handshake. I was like, that was a good set. He's like, you're funny. And he did have a really good set that night. And I was just like, yeah, I was like, Freddie can bring it. And that was the first time where I was like, oh yeah, you know, I was like, I'm not gonna doubt him anymore. Cause I was just like, I had only seen him like 2 or 3 times before that. And that was the moment where I was like, you know what, I was like, I'm definitely gonna bring him back. And I'm pretty sure like this would be probably another stepping stone for him in his comedy, you know, career, or at least, you know, in the beginning of it, when you can pretty much handle a heckler or somebody who's pretty much, you know, gotten the first 3 comics out of their game, and then he comes in and basically takes care of them and shuts them up, basically. And that was awesome to watch. The guy kind of stuck around for like the next 2 comics, and I remember he left, but still he went out of his way to like tell Freddie, like, yeah, it was a good set and you're funny. So that was like one where I was like, okay, I was like, I don't really have much to say to Freddie, except that he could sometimes be too boisterous when watching other people's sets, but I was like, that's also like not really an issue for me. The only thing is that I would say to Freddie is just to keep going. I know that at times he's been kind of like thrown off by what other people have said to him, or like he, sorry.
It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. So he's been, you know, thrown off by the fact that one of his closest friends, you know, came. I did see him, you know, because there was one show that we had here at Heavy Seas Ale House, and Freddie was opening for that particular show, and I remember, you know, he was talking to his friend, and he told me that was like his really closest friend, came out down from Baltimore, I believe, or somewhere in Maryland, and just, you know, came to basically support him. But he ended up leaving, and then I told Freddie, I was like, hey man, I need you to get into the I need you to get ready to go up. So I remember he performed, did a really good set, and then after that, a couple of days later, you know, he seemed distraught, had a couple of posts on Facebook, and I was like, hey man, what's going on? And he was just like, you know, that guy that was there, you know, he totally trusted him, you know, he was like one of my closest friends, very big supporter. It turns out, you know, he wasn't supporting me at all, almost like basically just like talk shit behind his back, and he was very hurt by it. And I was like, I'm sorry man, sorry to hear that, but I was like, you should I was like, I know it hurts that your closest friend just did that to you, but I was like, you're funny. I was like, you are a funny guy, and I was like, you shouldn't buy into any of that crap that, you know, that you're not funny or that people laugh at you because you're disabled or anything like that. I was like, after that experience with that heckler, I was like, you pretty much showed you can handle yourself up on stage. And I was like, and you poke fun of yourself in a manner where I was like, people laugh. And I was like, it sometimes can be uncomfortable, but the way he does it is just, it's one of those where I'm like, yeah, he's he will make people laugh, and they could just be like, thinking about it, like, damn, that's kind of fucked up. But the way Freddie does it, it's just, that's the way he is. So that's when I was like, you shouldn't really take too much into that. And I was like, I know people are fucked up and they're always going to talk shit. And I was like, they're always going to say something about you. I was like, family, even for me, you know, it's like, they don't really support my comedy. They don't really think that it's good for me to be doing it. But I was like, you're going to have people who are going to always say something negative. And even when you do make it, or if you do get to a point where you're getting paid to do comedy, people are still going to talk shit about you. But I remember, you know, like we had conversations on Facebook before. He's had some posts where he seemed down, and I always reached out to him, and he's reaching out to me too. And I could honestly say, I'm like, through those interactions on Facebook, I get to know him more. Sometimes I wish I could reach out and actually hang out with him. We've scheduled times where we've wanted to, but we never actually had the opportunity to do so. But I could say that, you know, like, him being hurt, I think every comic kind of goes through that too. When somebody, like, pretty much you find out somebody thinks you're terrible or you're not funny, especially when it's somebody that you're close to. And I think for him, I was like, I just wouldn't want him to get sidetracked, you know, thinking that, you know, that's going to be a deterrent for him to stop doing comedy, because I don't want him to stop. Yeah.
Realize this thing's unplugged, but it's fine because it's still rolling. It's just not charging. This is going really well so far.
Okay. I'm just trying to think, do I have any advice for Freddie? I would just say keep going. I mean, he's got the talent. I just don't know what else is going on in his life too as well. It's something where I'm like, sometimes comics got things going on in their personal lives, and I just don't know how much of an effect it has on them. But I would say that he's definitely doing it. I would say just to keep going. I don't know how long has he. Do you know how long he's been doing it for?
I think he told me last time. And I think I have it on tape somewhere. I think he's been doing this since 2012.
2012.
I'm
okay.
not sure.
Yeah. I guess my advice to him is just to keep going and trying to build up, you know, his comedy resume, basically.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure one day he'll be opening for somebody at the Draft House, or yeah, I could totally see him doing that. And he's not. I hope he doesn't think that he's like sort of like people are interested in him because he's in a wheelchair, and I don't buy that at all. It's like when I see him, I don't really. It's the first thing you notice. I think every audience member, you know, it's like obvious. You know, it's like, oh, okay, this guy needs to be carried up on stage, but you kind of that's what's good about him, is that you kind of forget about that. You know, especially when he starts making his jokes, and then you're like, okay, it's like you start to say, oh, like, I would hang out with this guy because I'm curious to see what he would do, like in person or like around my friends or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you do kind of just to run off track for a little bit. He did seem. He told me that a while ago he tried to avoid doing material that had anything to do with being in a wheelchair, like, because he didn't want to pigeonhole himself. He didn't want to put himself in that corner. And then eventually he kind of made peace with the fact that that's a perspective he has that other comics don't.
Right.
And that, you know, it's a weapon in his arsenal that people don't get used on them very often, and so it hits people kind of like in this spot where, like, they laugh at something that they normally wouldn't, that they would normally feel bad about even thinking.
Right.
But he's able to just come out and say it, and he has the right to say it too.
Mm-hmm.
is the other great thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's one particular one that he talks about, like, and I think we've all thought it. You know, it's like when you go to the amusement park and people in the handicap, you know, people who are in a wheelchair get to the ride, you know, they get to skip the line practically. And I always thought, and I even said it once early on in my career, I was like, man, it'd be fun to have have a friend who's in a wheelchair, so I could take him to the amusement park with me, just so we could skip the line. And I know he's brought it up where they're like, you know, Freddie, just act more, you know, more retarded. And then he does it, and it's just like, oh my God. It's like, he has the license to do that. I could never do something like that, obviously. But it was just like, when he does it, it's just like, I could see that. Like, I could totally see, you know, somebody just being like, you know, act a little bit more disabled, or, you know, it's like totally on PC, but it's like, it seems also very true to life, where somebody would just be like, hey, just act it up a little bit, you know, just to get whatever it is that they're trying to get. Which I'm just like, yeah, he can totally get away with it, you know. And if that's actually something that happened to him in real life, then I'm like, yeah, totally believable, totally, you know. It's like, I've never been in that situation, I've never been in his shoes, so I'm like, if that really does happen, I would love to, you know, hear more about that. And if he brings that up on stage, I just think that, yeah, the audience would totally connect with him even more when he brings those personal stories. So yeah, I mean, for him to not want to do it, I would be surprised, because that's pretty tough if you're gonna go talk about everything else but not talk about yourself. And the fact that you're in a wheelchair just would be like, you know, I would be, as an audience member, I would be like, man, he didn't even talk about himself. Like, and that's one thing I do tell my students. I'm like, talk about yourself. I'm like, we don't know you, and that's the thing. It's like, if you're gonna make yourself unique and you're afraid of somebody stealing your material, you gotta talk about yourself and make it to the point where only you can tell that story. Because I get so many students who are like, oh, well, what if somebody steals my jokes? I'm like, well, if your jokes are very unique to you and somebody steals it, then we'll know. And this is a very small community, so we'll know somebody's been stealing your jokes. Or, you know, if there's sort of some, if it's a little too similar, they will question, you know, that comic, be like, hey, did you talk to so-and-so about that particular joke? Because it seems like you guys have something very similar. So I've seen that, but yeah, I wouldn't want him to stop talking about himself for sure.
Let's just give this a few seconds.
Sure. Yeah, the elevators are over here, so it tends to, sometimes
Yeah, it's okay.
if they, sometimes if like not all 4 elevators are working, it tends to like back up and people will just, yeah.
I just wanted to give it like a few seconds of like uninterrupted background noise so that I can, like if I can record the background noise on its own, I can just like isolate that and clean up the audio a little bit later. Because like when we're sitting here recording, I'm not sure, like, because I pick up on the sound eventually, but it's like, oh shit, wait, how much of this conversation have people been murmuring in the background for?
I don't know, it just seemed like recently. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Sound of silence. What time is it? We are 11:27.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna set an alarm for 20 minutes from now.
Sure.
Sound. So we can wrap up
Okay.
like 11:50. Unless you still have like a little more steam to go straight to 12. That's
I think 20 minutes, and then if there's anything else, then I'll definitely let you know.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So 11:50. Boink. Not PM. What the hell? Okay. Have you ever seen him taking criticism from other comics?
I have not seen anybody talk to him specifically about his jokes. The few times that I've run shows, I mean, I've always seen them talking in the background, and I'm so kind of like busy with dealing, either hosting or just running the show. So I don't really know if anybody's ever said, hey, have you ever thought about doing this? Or, you know, maybe I like this, but maybe go in this direction. Haven't seen it. Usually it's like good set, or like he'll say good set to other comics, and then if they do have some sort of conversation, I'm definitely not aware of what's being said at that point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. God, sorry, I got a lot more than I thought I would get already. So this is, man, grasping. No, I'm not grasping at straws. I feel like I'm going to be forgetting something.
Well, there's one thing where Freddie does owe me some money, though. That's for sure. So that show where he had the heckle, where he handled the heckler, he asked me. He was like, "Hey, man," he's like, "Can I get some wings and a beer?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, man." I was like, "I'll take care of it." No, I think he asked just for a beer, and I was like, "Yeah, sure, I got you." So the thing that sucks about that particular venue, they were not supportive of like giving us any sort of like comp meals or comp drinks. So I was like, he came out of his way. He got there early, which is something that's like a big plus. I like comics that get there early. And then, but I think it's because he got to schedule his time with the bus. So I got him a beer, right? And by the end of the night, I was like, okay. And I remember the waitress was like, "Oh, somebody forgot to close out their tab." I was like, "That's probably me." I was like, "I ordered a beer," and she was like, "No, somebody ordered wings and something else." And I was like, "Get the fuck out of here." I was like, "Freddie probably orders like some food or whatever." But I was like, because of the fact that he handled that heckler, I was just like, whatever. Not to mention none of the other comics requested any food or drinks. So I was like, "All right, Freddie, I got you." But it was just, I was just remember just being like, "Damn, Freddie asked for more stuff." I was like, he's got the balls to do stuff. That's the one thing I do like about Freddie. It's like, he ain't afraid. You would think that he's the type of who's a little bit more shy, or a little bit more humble, and you would think he's like a little bit just, like what's the word I'm looking for? It's just like a little bit more careful. He's not careful. He's just kind of like, this is what I am, this is what I want, and I'm gonna get it. And that's why I was like, when I saw him do that with the heckler, I was like, I saw that change in him. And I was like, I think when you realize, and you kind of watch and observe other comics, and you can tell they've been thrown off, and then you kind of go in there with saying, "You know what, I'm going to take care of this guy," and stick to it. Because I've heard comics who are like, "Oh, I'm going to get that guy," and they do, and it's kind of like a half-ass attempt. And it's just like, all right, you tried, but you didn't really succeed. Because if he's still going after the other comics, then you didn't really shut him down. I mean, he shut him down. And so that's why I was like, okay, he went there with a plan. He obviously had some sort of strategic moment in his head as to what he was going to do. So yeah, when he took care of the guy and shut him up, and that guy was not he was a pretty tall guy. I remember that, tall guy with long hair. Probably a Hispanic guy too, and I was just like, I remember him saying, "Oh, they should be across the street because they do comedy shows at the Draft House." And I remember he was so annoyed, but I just remember when Freddie went up there, he really was like, "Yeah, he got me. He got me good." Couldn't really tell you anything specific about that set, but I do remember the reaction and how the first 2 minutes of that set, he was just pretty much talking about him and that date, and even like hinting at the date he should be with me. It's not him. It was fucking hilarious. It was good. So yeah, I didn't mind him ordering the wings and fries or whatever else he had ordered after that. But I was like, fucking Freddie, man. I was like, no shame whatsoever. Not even say, "Hey man, I'm sorry, I added this." Nothing. Like not even the next day be like, "Hey, let me send him a message." Be like, "Sorry, I asked for other things too." No, I was just like, till this day, I don't think he recalls that, or he probably wasn't. If he admits to it, I'd be like, all right, cool. At least he remembers. But if he doesn't remember, I wouldn't even be surprised about that too. Looking Freddie. Other than that, yeah, that's pretty much my only story with Freddie. Yeah. But anything else that you want to know about him?
I'm sure something will come in a minute. That's just funny to think about. It sounds to me, because I've worked in at a microbrewery for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds a little bit like Freddie maybe just like didn't know how the tabs there worked. It's just a guess. I mean, this is very benefit of the doubt,
Mm-hmm.
but like also does sound like the kind of thing that maybe he would try to get away with.
Yeah, and I heard that about comics. Like, I hear comics always like trying to get away with something, and I was just like, that's one where I was like, I didn't mind it. I was like, whatever. I was like, Freddie, definitely not somebody that I would be opposed to. If it was somebody who I didn't know and asked for that, I would be like, I don't know. This is, but then I would be pissed off and never ever use that comic ever again. But I invited him like 2 times after that, so it just goes to show like I didn't really hold to that, but he still kind of owes me some wings and fries or whatever.
Have you never mentioned it to him?
No, I never mentioned it to him. No.
See, that's what makes me think that he probably just didn't know. Like he probably thought that, like, you know, when
well, you know what
when
happened?
he got the beer, he didn't probably realize that they were going to put it on the same.
You know. Also, what happened too is that he did say that his cousins were going to come and watch him, but since he was early that particular set at that particular show, they did show up. But they showed up after his set, and I know that they were talking afterwards, and it's quite possible that they were like, oh, you know what, we're heading out, and because the rest of the show was just kind of like and again, it was a dud of a show, so I could tell that they were just like, all right, let's get out of here, and he left, and that was pretty much the last time I saw him at that point. But yeah, you're right, it probably was a situation where he probably didn't know, and when he's with family, he probably got caught up with connecting or catching up with them. So,
yeah. It could also very well not be, but I'm just saying, like, it's such a perfect smoke screen. There's no way to penetrate.
Yeah.
Okay. Shit. I have no idea, man.
Okay. Let me see if I have anything else that I would like to add.
Well, why don't you talk about why don't you talk more about yourself for a little bit?
Okay. So I started doing comedy about 7 years ago, and a lot of comics that went through RFD met Ralph Cooper. So he was the host of that show, creator of that show, and that was the room I would go to. Like, I would do stand up. I think at that point when I first started out, about once a month. And for me, it was like the most nerve-wracking thing to do, and I would prepare for in the beginning, I remember I would prepare for weeks in advance and go over the material a week before I would go up to an open mic, no less. And then eventually, gradually, I would start going, probably 2 times a month, but always to the same venue, to RFD, because it was that supportive, it was a very supportive crowd there. And you could try anything, and I was always writing different material for each set, which after year 1 I realized that's not what you would do, because you can't really build a routine that way if you're writing up different jokes all the time. So I think after a year or 2 after doing that, I remember I found my first joke that I was like, oh crap, this actually works. Every single time I tell it, it works all the time. And that was the big moment where I was like, oh man, this is great. Now I have a joke that I can use if I'm bombing. I throw it out there, I'm back in the game. And it was a joke that I was gonna post on Facebook, on my brother's timeline, and I didn't use it for a long time. And it wasn't until I got my car broken into, and I had a joke about how he took all my coins and even took my McDonald's coupon book. Cause I was one day I went to McDonald's, I was like, man, what the fuck's my coupon book? And I was like, damn, the fucking asshole even took my coupon book. And I thought that was hilarious. And I went up on stage and I tried it, and it just not good at all. And everybody was just it was pretty much crickets. And that was the one I was leaning on the most. And then I threw out that joke about the Facebook, and I was just I saw people laughing, and I was like, holy shit, I didn't think this would actually work, but I was looking for something at that moment and thought about that. And that was pretty much what turned around my whole comedy career right then and there. Because then after the first time of dropping that particular joke, it was probably a couple weeks later I tried it again, and that's when I saw it. I was like, oh, it worked. And then I kept going with it, and then got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm tired of using this joke, and I gotta find something else. And that's how I started building my routine at that point. And then I started, been doing it so long that I know a lot of the comics in the scene, and a lot of times, I take breaks from comedy, and that's something I wish comics would do a little bit more of, especially starting out. It's it's okay to take a time out from the scene and recharge or get some new material or stuff that happens to your life and really think about it and then go back up on stage and try it again. Or try, you know, some new stuff, just to keep yourself feeling refreshed, because it can get really depressing out there, you know. Not to mention, for me, I like to be outside when it's warm out and there's less audience members in the summertime. So for me, it's just like comedy's more of a winter game for me. So especially when people got nowhere else to go, the weather sucks, it's cold out, people are looking for things to do, go to a comedy show. And they tend to be a lot more supportive, you know, even on like on a Wednesday or a Tuesday night, you know, versus like when it's warm out, spring, summer, like you're not going to really find much going on. So then once I would say like after doing it 4 or 5 years into it, my boss had known that I did comedy, which was kind of awkward. And then I was just like, it was just awkward because I don't like talking about it, because people usually are like, oh, you know, like either tell me a joke or they want to know what kind of comedy you do. And for me, I like comedy that's very dark, twisted, fucked up sense of humor. That's why I like Freddie a lot, because it's like, I like that he pretty much tells it as it is. It's very like, you know, it's very dark comedy. And so it's kind of hard in the workplace to be like, yeah, you know, that's kind of my comedy, that's my shtick. Because I hate it when they like, even like at a training session, they're like, oh, we have a comedian in here, and I'm like, oh, fuck. And then I think the funniest was when I was at a meeting, in a training session, and we met like once every 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember one time they were like, well, we thought you were the comedian. Like they pointed to some other guy, because he looked more like the comedian, and he's very like gregarious and, you know, the type of guy who makes jokes, office jokes or whatever. And I thought it was funny because they were like, oh, we thought you were the comedian. We never thought it was the librarian who was the comedian. And I'm just like, I was like, good. I'm like, good. I'm glad you guys thought it was him. But yeah, it's like kind of frustrating because I was like, I don't really like talking about it or telling a joke that I know would either probably offend people or it's just not really for the workplace, you know. So yeah, it's always kind of awkward. But then I did tell my boss, I was like, you know what? It would be nice to do a class where I could introduce some comics to a group of people who are interested in doing stand-up. And you know, this would be a different program for the library. And I was totally unprepared for the first session that I did. I had over 50 people sign up for the class, and I was like, holy shit, like what am I gonna do with 50 people? I only expected maybe about 5 people to sign up for a class, and I'm like, this is a library program. Like usually I would think like, you know, maybe like some seniors who want to try stand up, or maybe, you know, some teenagers or, you know, parents who are like, yeah, I want to try stand up. No, I had like a variety of people, all different age ranges, all different backgrounds. So I remember I was totally unprepared. I didn't even have slides like I should have. It was just basically a complete shit show my first time running it. And it was a different format. It wasn't really more about them performing at the end. It was more about like, let me just give you a couple of pointers, a couple of things, introduce you to some comics, and then let's go to a comedy show so you can get up on stage and just try it. And at the time there was one at the Boston Mall, which was not far from the Central Library. And yeah, it was one of those where it was like for 4 weeks, it was quite an interesting group of people that I was talking to. And then I switched it up where I was like, I'm gonna limit the registration to about 15 people. So once it came down to that, I worked on some PowerPoint slides, and then found a venue that would wanna host a comedy show. Then that's how that class pretty much took off at that point. And it's interesting, I'm like glad to see a lot of people who have taken my class and are continuing to do stand-up. So, yeah. The AC vents over there.
Okay, I thought the place was like fucking haunted.
Yeah, no, and that's pretty much what I've been doing, and I think I'm gonna scale it back a little bit just because, like, kind of got other things going on personally, and yeah, so yeah, it's been fun teaching it.
Is like fucking Bruce Willis gonna drop out of the bench or some shit?
I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah.
Is it almost time?
Very nearly, yeah.
And he, yeah.
I think this has been great.
Yeah, I just don't remember exactly when I remember, or what was it that Freddie said besides the fact that he had to be carried up on stage. But I think it was the fact that he was like, at first I thought it was kind of a shtick, because I was like, does he really need somebody to lift him up there? Yeah.
Have you seen how big that dude is?
Yeah, I know, he's heavy, you know? And I just remember how particular he was about being lifted and, you know, being brought back down. And I just thought it was just funny the way he was just like barking orders. You know, it's like, who does that? I was like, you need to be lifted up. I was like, I could just easily just drop you right here. But, yeah.
That's part of what makes it so funny.
Yeah. But I'm glad he had a good set at, was it Winter Garden, or what's the venue that he just did?
Oh, Winter Garden, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show when comics talk about you and they say, oh, Freddie Ramirez had a great set, you know, then you know it's like people are watching, people are noticing. They're like, that's kind of where I think he should definitely keep it up, where eventually, you know, they're going to have him at different other venues that are a little bit harder to get into. You know, when people start noticing you and some comics get a hold of the fact that you're doing well in one particular place, they're going to want you to come to theirs. It's kind of a weird game because it's like everybody has their own cliques. I don't know if he has anybody. He seems to be pretty independent, but I think hopefully, you know, with that particular set that he just had, hopefully that'll take him somewhere else, you know, in the city.
Hopefully. I mean, either way, it's on tape.
Yeah. Well, there's some other places, you know, it's like, there's some venues that I'm like, you can't get there unless you're invited, you know. It's like they quote unquote have an open mic, but it's one of those that's only invite only. And if he starts getting invited to those, then I'm like, oh yeah, you know, you're definitely shooting up. So
The moment that, because I mean, I was kind of busy, just like running camera, and so like I had my sense of humor just kind of turned off when I was in robot mode the night that I recorded him at Winter Garden. But it was afterwards I realized that that this set was very special. Like, yeah, even while I was recording it, I knew it was a good set. Mm-hmm. But like it was when I went back and watched it again later, and like I caught some of the audience reactions. But also there was a post-show interaction. I was talking to a guy, Jesse Rivas.
Oh, Jesse Rivas, yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to him. And what Jesse said to him, he didn't just say that it was a good set. He said, this was so much better than the last time I saw you.
Okay.
And so like that's the thing that told me that this was something special, was not like, because it wasn't like a naked compliment. Mm-hmm. It was more like, you know, it was like an acknowledgement of growth. Yeah. Is what it was. And that was, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's a big compliment, because Jesse used to host a room up in Rockville, and then there was one in Bethesda. So him and this other guy named Joey. So they, you know, he definitely has an eye for when somebody definitely has improved. Ralph Cooper, I'm pretty sure you're going to interview him eventually, but I'm pretty sure Freddie can attest to this, and all the comics, even my student comics, can attest to this. When you have a good set, well, when you did have a good set at RFD and Ralph was hosting, there was a certain body language and way and demeanor that he would kind of like give you, like, that was a good set, you know, and that's right after you just finished, because it was a matter of a handshake, and it was just a look, and usually if he gave you like, sort of like a nod, like, that was good, then you knew, you were like, okay, if Ralph said that was a good set, or like gave me that nod, then it was a good set, you know, and it's not just bullshit either. So that was another way of my students even learning, you know, like, oh yeah, I had a good set at RFD, and Ralph even kind of like, was like, yeah, that was good. Because, you know, as a host, sometimes you're like walking around, you're not really paying attention, like you know, you're filming, you're not really like, really aware, but if something catches your eye, you're like, oh, okay. Or one or two good jokes, yeah. So I wonder if Freddie had that moment with Ralph, you know, or when was his first moment when he's like, when he got that handshake and that nod from Ralph? Because I remember mine, it was like, had been going around to different rooms, I finally decided to like go outside of the RFD circle, and I started going around, started practicing, I started doing sets around the city, and then that's when I was like, I came back to RFD to do a show, and I was kind of like prepared. I was like, yes, I was like, this is not, you know, what it was like before. And then when I got that handshake and nod, I was like, cool. It's like all this hard work finally paid off, and it felt good. And it felt more good. I mean, like for me, it felt better to get that from him than it was to get like a very explosive laughter at the end of my set. And I was like, just that handshake and nod was totally worth it. So I wonder if he has that same experience as well at RFD, since he has such a fondness for that particular room.
I'll ask him.
Yeah, please do.
I'll ask him.
And ask Ralph if you do interview him about that, about his.
I'm trying. I'm really trying. Freddie's trying to connect me with him.
Yeah, I know he's a busy guy, but if you do get a hold of him, I would just say like, when was it, like, how do you go about expressing whether or not a comic had a really good set? It would be interesting to see what he says.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to see if Freddie ever got that sort of experience as well too.
One thing that I'm liking about this project, we did just hit 1150, so I'm going to start wrapping up. But one thing I am liking about this project is that I can cast a very wide net as far as time goes.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no official deadline for this thing, and so I'm kind of following this story where the different leads take me, so like if I want to get an interview with Ralph Cooper, I don't have to worry about doing it before a certain date. It's just like then I'm just going to wait patiently like a sniper so
Right.
I can shoot him.
Right.
That's like the worst analogy for that though.
Shoot him. All right.
But yeah. Yeah, let's cut this.